They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And there is just so much to talk about. We warned you, after Labor Day, it is like full speed ahead until the first week in November when the country turns out to vote in a presidential election for 2024. And Katie, as we record this today, it is debate. Well, it's debate day, debate night tonight. For the very first time, maybe the only time, Kamala Harris and President Trump will face off against each other. And if the Biden-Trump debate was highly anticipated, I think that this one might be even more. There's more anticipation for this one. What do you think?
I think I know I personally feel more anticipation. I think because there's more unknown. And honestly, I think also, what happened in the fallout of the Biden-Trump debate was really surprising for people. I think people are like, oh, these debates can be really consequential. Let's see what happens. And I think it is a big test. I think a lot of people want to see, can Trump be presidential? Can he restrain himself, not go after her personally so much? And, can she get an intelligent sentence out? It's a big question.
It's a rough one. A lot of word salad is being tossed over at the Harris-Walz campaign. Well, let's talk about the prep, because there's so many different angles to talk about. But I was actually surprised to learn. We knew that, first of all, I think it's ridiculous. Kamala Harris brings a guy in who spent hours watching President Trump on mute so that he could get his body language down. This is not a competition for best Trump impersonation. I would think you'd probably want to get a handle on the type of rhetoric, the type of words that President Trump uses. But it seems he was focusing on the physicality of Trump, which was interesting. So she's had that person kind of coming in and doing mock debates. She's been undercover. She chose to go off the campaign trail, and she's been locked away in Pittsburgh for the last 5 days or so. Trump, on the other hand, has been really keeping up a pretty big schedule, an aggressive schedule. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, we knew Tulsi Gabbard was helping him prepare because she was successful in really debating Kamala Harris, knocking her out of the 2020 Democrat primary. But he brought in Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz, that surprised me, is a firebrand. I think you can say that there's a million things about Matt Gaetz that you love and probably a couple of things that you're like, oh boy. But Matt Gaetz, I think, is interesting for him because it talks about the tone that Trump's going to take. I think he needs to be kind of down the middle like he was when he debated Joe Biden. I don't think that he can make it very personal because then it looks like the big bad man picking on the woman. But I do love the intelligence of Matt Gaetz and the snappiness. I think it's going to be a fine line between not seeming condescending, but also having some quick snapbacks for some of the things that we know Kamala is going to throw at Donald Trump.
Well, one of the things that strikes me, and this might be because I just this morning had coffee with an older Republican and hearing his perspective. Now, here's someone who is not a Trump lover, but he will vote for Trump. But he kind of was griping and saying, I don't understand, Kamala's doing 5 days of prep and Trump is out playing golf. Okay, so this tells me, first of all, this guy is probably reading the Washington Post, right? Because I think this is a leftist talking point. But what's interesting to me is, I think Trump is prepping every single day because he is constantly out there talking about his policies. He was on 39, he did like 39 interviews in a 1 month period. He's been all over the place, lots of things that we're not even hearing about in the mainstream because of course nobody reports on it. But he's doing just a massive number of interviews. Every interview he does, he talks serious policy. So I think he's very, very well prepared. I think it's the best kind of practice you can have. And let's not forget, right? I mean, that especially in light of the fact that the Reagan movie is out right now in theaters, but this was such a key point for Reagan. What made Reagan such a good orator was the fact that he spent years not even as governor of California, but the fact that he did all these radio broadcasts for General Electric, right? General Electric.
That's right.
So
My
it was that
grandmother
constant
a little piece of Jennifer Horn history, actually, at General Electric. She'd take him all around. She was the president's assistant.
Wow. So the fact that, he had all that practice, I think that's really, really important. So to me, that's the most important part of Trump's debate prep.
I also think there's a couple of things to consider here too. And I understand, I've heard people say, oh, Trump needs to be preparing more. This is a man who never stops. He's constantly preparing. He also doesn't have to prepare as much as Kamala Harris does because President Trump has things that he believes in. He has policies that he had a hand in creating. He actually has some integrity in his beliefs about what's best for the country. And I say that because Kamala Harris, I really, truly believe does not. She tells people what they want to hear when she's standing in front of the groups that want to hear it. And so she, of course, needs to prep because she didn't even have any policy points on her website until 2 days ago. And those policy points were copied and pasted from the Biden campaign site. So this is a woman who is completely transactional. She will promise something to one group of people and then flip around and say something else to somebody else. It's very evident when she talked about the wall being a medieval device and an ego project of President Trump. And now she says we need a wall. When she talked about how she wants to have criminal justice reform, yet she threw Black men in prison in California for low-level drug offenses like holding an ounce of marijuana. I mean, these are the kinds of things. She has no integrity in her policies. So of course she has to prep a little more. But I also don't buy that the preparation isn't there because President Trump is constantly talking to people, doesn't matter who, from all walks of life. That is constant preparation. He's talking to people. He's listening to people. I believe that he's taking advice from people around him. I think he is actually going to be, a lot of people are saying that she wants to try to poke at him and get him to respond in a negative fashion. And look, we know President Trump is reactive, but he's also not a fool. And I think he knows what he needs to do to go in there. And I think the people who say that almost treat him as sort of this useful idiot or this person who's not very smart. He's incredibly smart and incredibly talented. And I think he gets undercut all the time by the mainstream media trying to underplay his strengths, which are his debates, actually.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, just the very fact that this whole line is going around that he's not prepping for the debate. Okay. And also you want to tell me being president for 4 years wasn't debate prep? Yeah. I mean, come on. So I agree with you. It's going to be really good to see how he does. And I think it's going to be very revealing. I do. She has not done well. Every time she's had an opportunity to open her mouth and speak, whether it was at the convention, or certainly in that interview, she doesn't do well. And talk about, the other thing that I think is so telling is that contrast between the two speeches that she made, where her actual accent changed according to the audience she was speaking to. Mm-hmm. Talk about sort of selling your soul, and not having an actual sort of deeply held conviction about what you believe in and who you are. I think that's kind of scary.
I do too. And I'm also really curious, and I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast or not, because you know what? Everything's blending together with me in this news cycle. But one of the things I'm going to be interested in seeing, as a woman, of course, the idea of having a female president excites me. I think that's exciting. I think that's a great breakthrough for women. It's an inspiration. I don't necessarily want that person to be Kamala Harris. And I also think fierce, strong women leaders probably don't need to stand on a stage leaning up against a man. And I was really disappointed that when she did her only and first real interview, she brought along Tim Walz kind of to support and lean on. I'm going to be very curious to see how she does in a debate where she has to stand by herself at the podium. No one in her ear, no one standing by to kind of jump in and change the subject or spin things around. It is just going to be her. And I think that's really important for women leaders out there because we need to be seen as people that can stand on our own and have our own thoughts and ideas. And we don't need Tim Walz standing behind us. So I'm interested just from a personal perspective, how she will do for the first time standing by herself at the podium.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm holding out for the first female president to be Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Me too.
So
I'd like that spot for her. All right. So
But I also just want to lastly say, to me, it's a little bit disappointing when for the women that I've heard express this opinion, who like her because she's kind. I'm sorry. I don't want kindness from my president. I want strength. I want a sense of authority. The fact that just because they think she's kinder than Trump, I think is just about the worst reason to vote for somebody.
I also hate to use a Trumpism here, but I think that might be fake news. I don't think she's that kind. I don't think she's that kind. I know that's what she's trying to show people, that she is kind and she is joyful and you're just going to feel so great if you vote for her. But what happens after you feel great? Are you going to be able to pay your bills? Can you buy eggs at the grocery store? Can you afford to gas up your car? I mean, there are so many weaknesses in the policy that are beyond kind. I mean, we're not in grade school. And if we are going to talk about whether or not she's kind, was she kind to Joe Biden when she called him a racist on the debate stage? No. Was she kind to the kids who were abused by Catholic priests and she wouldn't help them with their investigation? No. Was she kind to the women who were assaulted by a former mayor in San Diego? No, she let them off because they shared a political consultant. Was she kind? I'll say it, to the wife of Willie Brown. Was she kind to the people in her staff, 92% of them who left? I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to besmirch. She might be the nicest person in the world. I don't know. But it seems very childish to just determine that someone's kind because they stand up in front of a microphone at a convention and talk about joy. I don't know.
But that's the image that the leftist media is trying to portray, because she's not strong on policy. So let's just paint her as kind and joyful. Nice. But I think your analysis is absolutely spot on. I think it's paper thin.
Yeah, I know it's like the high school evaluation of people. It's like, do you want the prom king or do you want the guy who's actually going to set you up for your future? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Now, what about the debate moderators? Because David Muir and Lindsay Davis are going to be the moderators. We were all surprised by CNN. They did a great job. I think they stayed down the middle, but I also think that there was an Operation Oust Joe Biden going on at the moment. So I'm curious to know if ABC will stay in their same lane, and make this a fair fight. I mean, they keep saying that they're not going to do anything to become the story, that they're just going to try to facilitate the conversation. I hope that is true. I would really love to see it because I think the country deserves that without the thumb on the scale that the mainstream media usually kind of gives to us.
Volatility and uncertainty are everywhere we turn. Many Americans have grown increasingly tired of the reckless fiscal spending, mounting national debt, and the looming threat to the dollar. With never-ending political and global conflicts, Americans are looking for a way out of the fragile paper system and craving a trustworthy asset to help protect their savings. That's why they turn to gold. Specifically, a gold IRA from Augusta Precious Metals. If you have over $100,000 in a retirement account, it's time you learned about the potential benefits of a gold IRA from Augusta Precious Metals. Augusta Precious Metals is a world-class organization that prides itself on top-notch service. Ready to learn more? Get your free guide on gold IRAs today by calling 855-222-6994. Volatility is everywhere. Now is the time to take control of your retirement to secure a brighter financial future with Augusta Precious Metals. Call them at 855-222-6994.
I
naively hold on to this hope that journalists today are starting to kind of wake up to the way they're being disparaged and disrespected, because so many of them just gave up all semblance of journalistic professionalism by becoming so utterly partisan. But as I say, I think that's naivete. I think these two are going to be, I don't know, every bit as partisan as we expect. I think ABC is one of the worst of the worst. I think they're right up there with CNN. So I don't know. Why is it that the left keeps getting to moderate these debates? What's with that? Do you know?
I think because, remember last week was supposed to be the first debate on Fox, and Kamala Harris's campaign wouldn't agree to it. So I really feel like President Trump there were supposed to be three. They had proposed Fox News last week, ABC this week, and then I think NBC or CBS, and then the other one would have gotten the vice presidential debate. And that would have been the third. But Kamala said she'd only do this one. And I'll be interested to know, I think if she fails in this one, or if she doesn't get the bump that she's looking for, she'll probably try to get Trump to debate her again. And at this point, this late in the game, I think if he has a strong performance tonight, she's the one that chose not to have 3 debates. If he has a strong performance tonight, he should probably just let it rest, because we're so late in the game, and this should have been decided weeks ago, and she should have agreed to all 3. Now I don't know if you can go back and renegotiate after you've made your choices, but I think that only happens if she has a weak performance and she feels like she needs to catch up.
Do you remember the story about Donna Brazile giving the debate questions to Hillary Clinton?
Absolutely.
You think we might be seeing something like that happening here?
That has concerned me, and it's actually crossed my mind, because apparently Kamala Harris is best friends with the head of ABC News. So, I mean, the conflict of interest is incredible. I hope that doesn't happen. I think even if it does happen, President Trump's preparation is going to be his. So he has the same amount of time to sell his policies, but I would hate for people to hand up, or continue to give her hands up, because she needs to prove to us that whether we vote for her or not, that she is going to be capable to sit in the room with Xi Jinping or with Vladimir Putin. And if you're having trouble sitting in the room with the friendly news media, which is what she showed us so far, how do I expect you to negotiate with Iran? I mean, it's just, especially with the way they feel about women, you need to have someone incredibly strong, given their gender, because there are differences. You need to be incredibly strong and confident to take this on. And it cheats. I don't know. I mean, I think it's possible, but I don't know if it does much to help her, because she still has a lot to prove.
And she is no Maggie Thatcher.
That's it. You've got to have that very strong backbone. All right. So that is the debate. The polls, just as a little piece of conversation as well. Polls are obviously polls, and we take them with a grain of salt. But as we saw Kamala Harris introduce herself as the coronated candidate for the Democrats, there was a big bump in the polls that benefited her. Now, when we talked about this, I said, if you look at these polls, they're oversampling Democrats a lot, by about 12% on average. They were oversampling Democrats. Now you're seeing these same polls start to tighten a bit. And President Trump has caught up in big ways, including with Latino voters, where he's up 14 points from August to September. This is huge. Registered voters as well. Independent voters, he's up 11 percentage points. You have to wonder if that has like the Kennedy factor involved, if there's something there, or if maybe the polling's just ironing out. The excitement has kind of settled down with Kamala Harris having a pulse instead of Joe Biden. Where do you think we are? I feel like no matter what the polls say, this is going to be incredibly tight. It's going to come down to the swing states, probably 2 swing states, and a couple of counties in those swing states will make the difference.
I don't trust the polling at all. If you look at, I sat on a call with the Trump Force 47 teams, and Corey Lewandowski was speaking to, all the volunteers. And he talked about the polling and what the numbers looked like in 2016 and 2020, and how off the polling was from the actual election results. So I think polling can't be trusted. And whether it's really a function of the people who are doing the polling, or a function of Americans maybe not wanting to say I'm voting for Trump, or simply not wanting to answer their phones. I don't answer my phone. If that person's not in my contact list, I will never answer my phone. So, you have to wonder, like, who's getting polled.
Have you ever been polled?
Nope.
Neither have I. I was just curious, because I always want to find that one person who actually says yes to that question. And if you look at the numbers of people, it's typically 900, 1,100. I mean, it's a very small amount in terms of a country or even a state.
Yeah. And you have to think about who's willing to really be public about it. But, the other thing, what I'm seeing, I always think Fairfax County is where I sit, is a really interesting test case, because A, we've got a lot of government workers here. B, we have a lot of foreign born citizens. We have we are 30% foreign born in Fairfax County, and the majority are legal. And it's really fascinating. So for the first time, I'm seeing our Chinese Americans getting super, super active, because, the fact that Tim Walz is so pro-China and has actually been pro-Mao, pro-Chinese communism, has them scared out of their wits. And so they're saying to me, they didn't come here. They didn't leave communist China to come to communist America. So, for the first time, we're translating our Fairfax County Republican materials into Chinese, they are distributing those materials in Chinese. And I just think you're seeing this across a number of the different ethnicities. Mm-hmm. Too many people left communism or totalitarianism or failed economies behind. People come to this country for freedom and for opportunity, and they see it slipping away, and I don't think they like it.
I think it's a great point. And I do think that there might be some buyer's remorse on Tim Walz. There seems to have been a lot of scandals, whether it's the military, the COVID stuff in his state, the investigations now going on in Congress about his COVID money. And, the honeymooning or getting married on the anniversary of the massacre in China. I mean, I don't know. I think the good old coach stuff might be wearing off. I think maybe she might have wished she would have gone with Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, but hey, we'll see. Now, before we move on from the debate, on debate morning, so Tuesday morning, Melania Trump, who we don't hear from a ton, she doesn't love the public eye, at least to speak out. She was a gorgeous model, of course, but she released a video. She does have a book coming out, which could be why she's talking a little more, but take a listen to the video.
The attempt to end my husband's life was a horrible, distressing experience. Now, the silence around it feels heavy. I can't help but wonder, why didn't law enforcement officials arrest the shooter before the speech? There is definitely more to this story, and we need to uncover the truth.
So that was Melania Trump talking about really calling for some news in the assassination attempt against her husband. This is a story that should be huge. And I sadly think that if the target had been someone else, we would still be talking about it, because the mainstream news media doesn't like Trump. They dismiss his supporters. They kind of have glossed over this. And we don't know a lot still about this person who shot him, about why he was allowed to roam free in Pennsylvania, even being seen and known, why there were areas that were left unsecure by the Secret Service. There are still so many questions. And this is such a huge story. And it shouldn't be political. This should not just be about Trump. This should be about protecting all of our elected officials and getting better with the Secret Service and getting better with local law enforcement and their coordination. But instead, once again, politics infects everything. And there are a ton of questions that we all still are very curious about, including the former First Lady.
And I'm so glad that she is speaking out. I think she's actually a very, very powerful voice, because she has been so restrained, and because, she clearly does embrace a particular set of values. Allegedly, I mean, she comes across as very deeply committed to her faith, very serious as a mother, as a wife, as a family person. And I think she's a really sort of admired and respected person. Not so much a voice, because she has been so quiet. So I've been actually really excited to see these last few days that she is speaking out. And I think it's really, I think it's important, and I think it's impactful.
I think so too. I'm glad to hear from her. I wish we would hear more from her. I think her silence is somehow, I think, translated by the mainstream news media as disinterest or even hatred of her husband. I think they love to paint this as a troubled relationship. And they don't know. That's just how they paint it. And so I'm excited. Actually, I'm going to get her book, and I hope we can get her on this podcast, because I would love to hear from her side what this is all about. She has been under intense media scrutiny, and she doesn't ask for it. So I think she's one of the most undervalued first ladies that we've had in history. And I can't wait for the book. And hopefully we'll learn more once that comes out and we can take a look into her side of things.
Agreed.
All right. So also, we're going to talk about your trip to Chicago here in just a few moments. But one of the things that irks me, I swear this is like therapy on this podcast. The thing that maybe has me most troubled this week, and well, for the last 3 years, is the Biden administration's response to Afghanistan. They botched the withdrawal. Obviously, we heard that Biden just wanted out at all costs. They used the National Security Council to make the decisions rather than the Pentagon. The National Security Council is about reviewing things, about strategy. It is not about operations. And they made a big mistake instead of going to the Pentagon to actually get operational support from the people that actually know how to do that. And what resulted was the death of 13 men and women, young men and women who are someone's children. I mean, it's just somebody's kid. And there are families who are left with gaping holes in them because of this move by the Biden administration. Now, we admit sometimes terrible things happen in war, or sometimes terrible things happen to people defending our country. And so when that happens, strong leaders come forward. Strong leaders stand and grieve with people, even when it's uncomfortable for them. That's not what the Biden administration has done. Biden, when the bodies were returned home, was checking his watch. He and Kamala Harris have not made one phone call to these Gold Star families who have said that President Trump has come to them and stood with them and spent hours helping them grieve and taking on some of the burden as his own to get it off of their shoulders. He went to Arlington and he was criticized for going to Arlington to politicize Afghanistan. But Katie, this week, a report came out from the House Foreign Affairs Committee and Michael McCaul, who's at the head of that. And they talked about all of the failures of the Biden administration during this move. Well, of course, the Biden administration comes out and says, no, this is the Trump administration's fault, which is nonsense. They're the ones who made the decisions. And part two of that, and I was appalled, is that John Kirby, who has military service, who is probably the best spokesperson, arguably, that the Biden administration has at the moment, comes out on Monday of this week and says that the families just need to move on, that the country just needs to move on. Obviously, that is such a cold-hearted and short-sighted assessment. We should move on, but we should never fully move on from the lives lost. We should use those mistakes to learn so that it doesn't happen to other families. And we should lift those families up who do have these holes in them and give them the support we need. And how dare these people who have just glossed over this tragedy suggest that we just move on, or that their families just move on. It was so troubling to hear. And another disappointment. Again, this is something that's beyond politics. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, you stand with the military, and you certainly stand with families who have lost someone defending us.
So I have a friend here in Virginia who lost her daughter on 9/11. And I was really moved to see that she is again, with all the families, going to New York tomorrow to remember 9/11 and to remember those that they've lost. Because, the point that President Trump said when he's talked about this issue of the 13, he did this at the Moms for Liberty event where he was being interviewed. And he said, when you lose a child like this, you never fully get over it. It leaves a hole in the family for the rest of your lives. So yes, they're going to always remember it. Yes, they're going to want to commemorate it. But I think what the point of why they're not able to move on is because, as you've said, the Biden administration has never properly acknowledged what happened, nor offered their proper condolences. Like, it's almost like they weren't allowed a proper funeral. And let's be clear, those families invited President Trump, President Biden, Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris was in DC. She was across the river. She was 5 minutes away on that day, and she couldn't be bothered to go to Arlington National Cemetery. President Trump had other plans, which he canceled so that he could be there. And then all the left can do is criticize him for being political.
Yeah, it's really, really heart-wrenching, and it's frustrating. And I think what they're thinking is that by not giving this attention or telling people to move on, that somehow it's going to go away. They need to own the mistake.
Yep.
They need to do what real leaders do, stand up, talk about what went wrong, offer a plan for the future, and offer condolences in the present. And that's what you do. And they have not been able to do it.
Nope. And they will never do it. That is not the kind of man that Joe Biden is. And I'm going to say it's not the kind of woman that Kamala Harris is.
That's right. All right. So let's lighten things up a bit, because
Yes.
you just did a little trip. You went to Chicago over the weekend and you spoke at a group for Black conservatives. Tell us about your trip, what you talked about, and about what you learned.
Great, great speakers. One of the things that stood out, so I was invited to speak because I talk about this issue in my book, Next Gen Marxism. One of the things that really stood out for me in doing the research is the way Marxists, whether Soviet Marxists in the 30s and 40s, or the new left Marxists of the 60s, or today's Marxists like Black Lives Matter and the critical race theory proponents, they all exploit Black people as a way to get power, right? So that's why I was asked to come speak. But it was really interesting to hear some of the commentary. So, for example, one of the things that really stood out for me was the way they talked about the border and the border invasion. And the way it strikes them is they are being erased. Because not only these illegals who are coming in, and I've seen these numbers, you know, I don't know if you've seen these in the last few days, the incredible numbers about jobs that are being lost by Americans versus jobs that are being gained by illegals. So a lot of these jobs are being lost by Black people. That's one thing, but also they see their numbers being diminished. They're being swamped by, you know, people coming in from the southern border. And I think it's really distressing for them. I have to say, one of the most interesting speakers, and I was going to tell you about her because I'd love to have her as a guest. It's a woman I've met before. She's a judge. It's a Black woman. She's now retired. She was a judge in the state of Pennsylvania. She's from Pittsburgh. So I knew that she'd had this really illustrious career. What I did not know is that she had been a high-ranking communist. And,
oh my gosh.
Yes. And she told her whole story. So both her father and her uncle, I guess I'm trying to think now what the timing would have been. Maybe it must have been in the 50s, maybe 40s and 50s. They were factory workers. They got caught up in the communist movement. They became communists. So then she was raised in this, you know, kind of communist mentality and got very, very involved in the communist movement. Eventually found Jesus, developed a faith and of course left it and became a conservative. And that's when life got really hard, right? Wow. Life was not hard as a communist. Life was hard for her when she became a Black conservative. So she's someone we'll have to get on to talk to.
I would love it. That's an interesting story. It's unbelievable how we're just steps away from how communism was infiltrating and still is, by the way, in the country. All right. Well, speaking of that, if you want to learn more, Next Gen Marxism is out wherever you get your books. Make sure you check it out. Katie Gorka did a great job writing that, co-writer on the book, of course, and you can get her website as well, katiegorka.org. We want you to follow her as well. Search Catherine Gorka on Facebook. You can find her as well at Gorka Katie on X, and you can find me online as well. Jennifer Horn Radio on Instagram and on Facebook, and Jennifer Horn on Truth and on X. And guys, we so appreciate you joining us. Please share this podcast with your friends. Leave us a 5-star review. It really does help. And if you want to connect with us on multiple platforms, you can find everything at SalemPodcastNetwork.com.
Hey, Jen, and before we sign off altogether, can I just put in a word for our next episode? I'm really excited about this.
Yes.
So we're going to be talking to Megan Basham, who's written this incredible book called Shepherds for Sale: How Evangelical Leaders Traded the Truth for a Leftist Agenda. She is an incredible journalist. I knew her from World Magazine, but she now works for Daily Wire. She has written this incredible book where she talks about the money that has changed hands, plus just the desire for prestige and acceptance that has led a number of our most high-ranking evangelical leaders to do the dirty work on issues like immigration, COVID-19, climate change. It is a fascinating read. We will be talking to her on Thursday.
I love it. All right. So the next episode, Megan Basham is here. And Katie, thank you. Thank you all for being with us. It's another episode of the Happy Women Podcast.